In a small diner in a quiet corner of New Jersey, the air was thick with nostalgia and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of conversation created a comforting atmosphere. At a booth in the far corner sat Richard Lawson, an elderly man with weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup. He often came here, ordering the same meal: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and cornbread. But today was different. He felt the weight of his past pressing heavily on his shoulders. Richard had always been a solitary figure, spending his days lost in memories of a life filled with both valor and regret. He was a veteran of World War II, a soldier who had seen things that haunted him even decades later. His heart carried the burden of a promise made to a friend, a promise that shaped his existence but also shackled him to the past. Across the room, a young man named Alex Reynolds entered, scanning the diner until his gaze landed on Richard. Alex had been searching for him, driven by an insatiable curiosity about the darker chapters of history that lingered like shadows. Taking a deep breath, he approached the booth, heart racing with anticipation. "Mr. Lawson?" Alex said, his voice steady despite the apprehension twisting in his stomach. Richard looked up, his blue eyes piercing through years of weariness. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone gruff yet curious. "I work for a private research firm," Alex replied, sliding into the booth across from him. "We dig up old military records, unsolved cases, things most people would rather keep buried. Your name keeps coming up in places it shouldn't." Richard let out a humorless chuckle. "Should have burned those damn files when I had the chance." Alex felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind threatening to push him over. "You were in the 45th Infantry Division, correct?" Richard's silence was all the answer Alex needed. The older man's expression shifted, and Alex could see the shadows of memories flickering behind his eyes. "There was a classified mission," Alex continued, "something buried deep in the records. A group of American soldiers cut off behind enemy lines, presumed dead. But you weren't dead, were you?" Richard's hand twitched as he stared at the table, fingers tightening around the edges. "I don't talk about those days," he muttered, his voice low. "That's the problem, Mr. Lawson." "Nobody does," Alex pressed gently, feeling the tension rise between them. "You were captured." The word hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. Richard's voice came out like gravel scraping against pavement. "Captured." Alex watched as Richard's expression hardened, memories of pain etched across his face. "I don't discuss it," Richard repeated, his voice low. Alex leaned in, sensing the gravity of the moment. "But you have to. There were 7 of you when you got captured, right? Only one made it out." Richard's eyes narrowed, the flicker of something dangerous igniting within. "You're looking in the wrong place," he said, his voice steady. "The real story isn't in the records." "Then where is it?" Alex pressed, eager to uncover the truth. "In the ground," Richard murmured, "with the men who never came back." Alex's breath hitched. "The men who never came back." Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There were 7 of us when we were captured. Only I made it out." His expression was unreadable, yet there was a calm resolve in his tone. "We were taken to an outpost deep in enemy territory. They didn't see us as prisoners, they saw us as leverage." "For what?" Alex asked, his curiosity piqued. Richard's gaze darkened. "Information." "What kind of information?" Alex pressed. Richard hesitated, his fingers tapping against the table. "Let's just say we knew things we shouldn't have." Alex felt a chill run down his spine. The way Richard spoke was intentional, heavy with unspoken truths. "They tried to break us," Richard continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "One by one, they picked us apart. I watched as my men fell. The silence between them was deafening. They wanted me to talk," Richard said, his jaw clenched. "To give up positions, names, strategies. I refused." Alex's stomach twisted. What happened then? They made me watch as they executed the others, Richard said, the pain in his voice palpable. Alex felt something break within him. But you escaped? He asked, desperate for a glimmer of hope. Richard's expression turned to stone. No. What do you mean? Alex frowned, trying to grasp the reality of the situation. Richard finally looked up, his eyes haunted. I didn't escape. I was let go. Alex's stomach twisted further. Why? Richard stared at him for a long moment before whispering, because I made a deal. Alex's blood ran cold. What kind of deal? Richard exhaled slowly. One that should have died with me. What did you give them? Alex pressed, feeling the weight of the moment. Richard looked down at his hands. After what felt like a lifetime, he whispered, a name. Alex felt the ground shift beneath him. Whose name did you give? Richard's hands clenched into fists. Thomas Caldwell. The name hung in the air like a death sentence. Alex's stomach twisted. He didn't know the name, but the way Richard said it made it clear this was more than just a name, it was a betrayal. Tommy was a kid, Richard said, his voice distant. Just turned 19, fresh out of training. He was the best of us, quick, sharp, fearless. You handed him over? Alex asked, incredulous. I didn't have a choice. Richard snapped, his eyes blazing. They put a gun to my head. I thought if I gave them Tommy's name, they'd spare him. I was wrong. Silence fell over the diner, the hum of the refrigerator barely audible. Richard's voice was a whisper now, heavy with agony. I thought they'd keep their word, but they didn't. The realization hit Alex like a punch to the gut. Caldwell never made it out. Richard's expression twisted in pain. No. So you lived, and he died? Alex's voice was barely audible. Yes, Richard admitted, the weight of his guilt palpable. The man in the suit who had been listening intently leaned forward. We spent years trying to uncover what really happened to Caldwell, he said. And we finally did. Richard froze. What do you mean? He didn't die in that camp, the man stated firmly. He escaped. Richard's breath hitched. What? Yes, the man continued, but he didn't come home. Then where is he? Richard demanded. We think he's still out there, the man replied. And he might not be alone. Richard sat frozen, his fists clenched on the table. Where did he go? We traced his last known location to Argentina in 1954, the man said. Richard blinked, struggling to process the information. Why would Caldwell be there? Some believe he was involved in a covert network, used to stop the spread of communism, the man explained. Others think he was hunting down war criminals. Richard's throat bobbed. He thinks I betrayed him. Exactly, the man said, sliding another file across the table. We have reason to believe he knows you're alive. Richard hesitated before opening the file. Inside were grainy black and white photos, surveillance shots of a figure walking through a marketplace and another of a man in a worn-out trench coat outside a cafe. The last photo made Richard's heart race. It was an older man sitting on a bench, his hair thin and white, but his eyes, those cold, hardened eyes, still burned. That's him, Richard whispered, a mix of disbelief and hope flooding through him. He's alive. The man nodded. We think so. He knows what happened, and he knows you were let go. Richard's fingers trembled as he turned another page. What does he know? That's what we need to find out, the man replied. Weeks turned into months as they pieced together the final fragments of the puzzle. Richard and Alex uncovered the truth. Mason had been a double agent, leaking intelligence for power and wealth. When Caldwell discovered the truth, he became a target, and Mason orchestrated the ambush that left Richard and his men behind enemy lines. With the help of Richard's friend, they tracked down one final lead, an offshore account tied to a man living under an alias in Spain. Richard's resolve hardened. He had spent a lifetime believing he was the villain, but now he had a chance to set things right. Months later, Leonard Mason was arrested in Madrid, the truth of his crimes finally brought to light. Richard's name was restored, his honor reinstated. For the first time in decades, he felt free from the weight of his past. As he sat in the diner, surrounded by friends and supporters, Richard reflected on a life spent in silence, haunted by guilt. But now, the ghosts of the past no longer controlled him. He raised his glass, acknowledging the battles fought and the ones still to come. "Here's to the ones we lost," Richard said, his voice steady. "And to the truth we finally uncovered." For the first time in years, the meal didn't taste like guilt, it tasted like freedom, peace, and the promise of a new beginning. But Richard knew that the journey wasn't over. The lessons he had learned would guide him, and the shadows of the past would always linger. Yet, he also realized that he was no longer alone in his fight. With Alex by his side and the truth finally out, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. As they left the diner, the rain had stopped, and the sun began to break through the clouds. Richard took a deep breath, feeling the warmth on his face, and knew that he had finally taken a step toward healing. The road ahead would be long, but he was ready to face it. With every step, he felt lighter, as if the burdens he had carried for so long were finally being lifted. And in that moment, Richard Lawson understood that while the past could never be changed, the future was still his to shape.